Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we bring you stories that warm the heart and challenge the mind. Today's story is one of resilience, love, and unexpected twists. It begins with a decision to adopt that should have been celebrated, but instead, it sparked scorn and ridicule. Yet, what unfolded in the years that followed is a powerful reminder that kindness, integrity, and courage can turn even the harshest critics into those who seek your aid. Stay with us as we dive into a story about family, prejudice, and a twist that will leave you in awe. If you love tales filled with unexpected twists and life-changing moments, be sure to comment below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an inspiring story from Hopeful Horizon. Also, let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Charles Walker sat in his sleek, glass-walled office. The city skyline spread before him like a painting. Success was everywhere, in the soft hum of expensive technology, in the confident steps of his high-level executives walking the halls of Altura Tech, and in the stock charts that climbed steadily upward. He had built this company from the ground up, navigating through a world that often overlooked people like him, a black man determined to break barriers. But recently, a gnawing feeling had taken root in his gut, whispering that something was amiss. It started subtly. Rumors, a few overheard complaints in the elevator, muted conversations between employees when they thought no one important was listening. The company had grown too large for him to personally oversee every department, and while the quarterly reports glowed with profit, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that behind the polished numbers, something was festering. He'd read the latest internal survey again that morning. Employee satisfaction seemed steady, but buried deep in the anonymous comments were hints of discontent. Words like toxic, micromanagement, and favoritism appeared too frequently. And that name, Linda. It wasn't the first time he'd seen it attached to less than glowing feedback. His executive team always downplayed these concerns. "Charles, we're doing great," his COO, Brian, would say during their meetings. "There's always a few unhappy people, but we can't focus on the outliers." But Charles wasn't convinced. He remembered how things felt when Altura Tech had just a handful of employees, where every voice mattered. Now, the more the company grew, the more he felt disconnected. Had his leadership team lost sight of the culture that had once made them thrive? Was there toxicity lurking under the surface, hidden by layers of bureaucracy? And so, an idea formed. It wasn't something Charles had ever considered before, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If he wanted to see the truth, he couldn't do it from his ivory tower. He needed to be among his employees, not as the CEO, but as one of them. That's when he decided he would go undercover. Later that evening, he shared the plan with his wife, Monica, as they sat across from each other at their dinner table. Monica had always been his sounding board, smart, perceptive, with a knack for cutting through his professional concerns with personal wisdom. "You're going to be a janitor?" Monica asked, her eyebrows raised. "Charles, are you sure this is the right move? What if someone recognizes you?" "I've thought about that," Charles replied, leaning back in his chair, the aroma of freshly grilled salmon still lingering in the air. "Most of the new employees wouldn't know me by sight. I haven't walked the floor in months, and I've been deliberate about keeping a low profile in the company lately. Besides, I'll be dressed differently, maybe grow a beard." She smiled softly, but her expression turned serious again. "I get why you want to do this. You've been talking about the company's culture for a while now. But going undercover? That's pretty extreme." "Maybe," Charles admitted, "but I can't rely on reports anymore. I need to see the truth for myself. There's too much at stake here. If I'm wrong, great, no harm done. But if I'm right, and there's a problem with how people are being treated, especially by management, I can't let that continue. Not at Altura Tech." Monica nodded, her eyes searching his face. She knew how much this company meant to him, not just as a business, but as a legacy. Charles had always prided himself on creating a place where people of all backgrounds could thrive. If that foundation was crumbling, it would break him to leave it unchecked. "I support you," she said finally, reaching across the table to hold his hand. "But just be careful. Not everyone's going to appreciate being spied on." Charles chuckled, squeezing her hand in return. "I know, but they won't know it's me." 2 weeks later, the transformation was complete. Charles had trimmed his usually neat hair to a close-cropped fade and grown a beard thick enough to change his look, but not out of place. His expensive suits were replaced by the worn, practical uniforms of the janitorial staff. Standing in front of the mirror that morning, he hardly recognized himself. Gone was the powerful CEO of Altura Tech. In his place was David, the new janitor, just another face in the company's vast sea of employees. As he walked into the building that day, passing through the wide glass doors he had designed to symbolize openness and transparency, no one gave him a second glance. His heart pounded in his chest. This was it. For the first time in years, Charles wasn't the center of attention. He wasn't the boss. He was just another worker. The hum of conversations around him felt different now. They were quieter, more personal. Employees walked past him without the usual nods of respect or cautious smiles. They didn't know him, didn't fear him, and that's exactly what he needed. As David the janitor, Charles would learn more in the next few weeks than he had in years of leading the company. He would see both the best and worst of human behavior. He would watch, unseen, as managers like Linda exerted their influence in ways that shocked him. But he would also witness kindness that gave him hope. For now, though, it was the beginning. A new journey, with no idea where it would lead. Charles, now David, held the handle of his mop as he walked through the polished corridors of Altura Tech, feeling an unfamiliar weight settle over him. He'd spent years striding confidently through these same halls in finely tailored suits, his presence commanding respect, sometimes even awe. But now, in his faded blue coveralls and scuffed boots, he was invisible. He hadn't realized how much his position had shielded him until that moment. Walking past groups of employees without a glance in his direction, he saw everything from a completely different perspective. The first hour of the day was spent learning the ropes from Carl, one of the senior janitors. Carl was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. He had been with the company for nearly 20 years. As they pushed a supply cart through the halls, Carl talked about his life and the job, with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. "You know, kid," Carl said, his voice gravelly but kind, "there ain't much to this work. You keep the floors clean, make sure the trash gets taken out, and stay out of people's way. But you'll see. Some folks treat you like you're part of the furniture." Charles nodded, soaking in every word. This was the kind of truth he had been missing. As CEO, people were always on their best behavior around him. They made sure to impress. But as a janitor, the mask dropped. He wasn't here to be impressed. He was here to see the reality. Midway through his first shift, Charles found himself in the bustling break room on the second floor, the one used mostly by customer service reps and middle managers. He entered quietly, keeping his head down, and began wiping down the tables near the vending machines. The chatter around him was casual, the kind of conversations that happened when people assumed no one important was listening. "Did you hear about the new guy in accounting?" one woman asked, leaning in toward her colleague, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Yeah, apparently he's another one of Linda's hires," her friend responded, rolling her eyes. "She's been on a power trip lately. Honestly, if I have to sit through one more of her meetings where she talks down to us like we're children..." Charles's ears perked up at the mention of Linda. He had heard complaints about her before, but never directly. This was exactly the kind of candid conversation he needed to hear. He quietly moved closer, pretending to clean the counter near the vending machines, his back to the women as they continued. "She's impossible," the first woman said, sighing. "Last week, she called out Angela in front of everyone for a mistake that wasn't even hers. Humiliated her. I swear she enjoys making people squirm." "That's Linda for you," the other woman replied. "But what can you do? She's got senior management wrapped around her finger, and if you complain, you're just seen as difficult." Charles felt a knot form in his stomach. So it was true. Linda wasn't just a tough manager. She was creating a hostile environment. And worse, no one felt they could speak up. His mind flashed back to the glowing performance reviews Linda had received over the years, always praised for her assertiveness and ability to deliver results. How had he missed the other side of this? The side where her leadership was causing damage? He wasn't just disappointed, he was angry, but he couldn't let it show. Not yet. He had to learn more. Later that afternoon, Charles was assigned to clean the third-floor offices. This floor housed some of the newer hires, mostly entry-level positions, but it was also home to the infamous Linda. As he wheeled his cart into the hallway, he spotted her in her glass-walled office, talking animatedly to a younger man who sat nervously in front of her desk. From a distance, Linda was the picture of professionalism, blonde hair neatly tied in a bun, sharp suit, and a commanding presence that filled the room. But there was something in her body language that set Charles on edge. He paused just outside the office, pretending to refill a trash can while listening in on the conversation. "These numbers are unacceptable," Linda said, her tone icy. "I don't care if you've been here only a month, I expect better. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe this isn't the right fit for you." The young man stammered an apology, his face pale. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Stanton. I've been trying, but the system—" Linda cut him off. "Excuses. That's all I'm hearing. Figure it out, or I'll find someone who can." Charles's grip tightened on the handle of his cart. He could see the fear in the young man's eyes, the way he shrank under Linda's withering gaze. This wasn't leadership, it was intimidation. And yet, as he moved on, pretending to finish his work, he wondered how many people in the company thought this was just how things were done. By the end of his shift, Charles was mentally exhausted. The physical work wasn't the problem. It was the emotional weight of what he had seen. Acts of kindness were few and far between, but when they happened, they stood out like beacons in the darkness. Earlier in the day, he had watched as a woman from IT, Sandra, helped a young intern who was struggling with a project. Instead of brushing him off or chastising him for not knowing the answer, she took the time to walk him through it, her patience unwavering. "We all start somewhere," she had said with a smile. "You'll get the hang of it." Moments like that gave him hope. Maybe not everything was broken. Maybe there were still people here who believed in the values he had founded Altura Tech on: respect, collaboration, and growth. But it was clear now. The company's culture had changed. It had been eroded by people like Linda, and the damage was deeper than he had feared. As he walked out of the building that evening, the sun setting behind him, Charles felt a sense of resolve harden in his chest. He had come undercover to find out the truth, and now he had it. But this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to uncover, and once he had the full picture, he would act. No one knew it yet, but Altura Tech was about to change, and this time it would be for the better. Charles's second week as David the janitor felt heavier, not just from the physical work, but from the mounting evidence he was collecting. Everywhere he turned, the divide between those with power and those without became clearer. He could see it in the way the employees interacted with management, the subtle power dynamics at play. People like Linda thrived in the shadows, and Charles was now painfully aware of how much had been hidden from him as CEO. As the days went on, Charles began to establish a routine. He arrived early, well before most employees, and left late, staying longer than the other janitorial staff. It gave him time to observe, to blend into the background, and in doing so, he saw things that both appalled and inspired him. It was Tuesday morning when he found himself back on the fourth floor, cleaning near the marketing department. He had grown accustomed to the routine: sweep, mop, empty trash cans. But today, something different caught his attention. Two women stood near the coffee machine, their conversation hushed but tense. One of them was Ava, a junior marketing associate who had just joined the company a few months earlier. The other was Linda. "I really think this new direction will appeal to a broader demographic," Ava said, her voice wavering slightly. She held a few printed sheets of her work, clearly hoping for some approval from her boss. "I put a lot of thought into the campaign, and I'm confident it will—" Linda didn't even look at the papers. She folded her arms and cut her off mid-sentence. "Ava, you've been here, what, 3 months? And you think you're qualified to tell me what direction the company should take? I've been doing this for 20 years. You need to learn your place." Ava's face flushed a deep red, and she stammered, I wasn't trying to—" Linda waved her hand dismissively. "This kind of amateur work won't cut it. If you want to stay here, you better learn fast. Now get back to your desk and fix this mess." Ava's shoulders slumped as she quietly retreated, gripping the papers as if they had suddenly become too heavy to hold. Charles's blood boiled, but he knew he couldn't intervene. Not yet. He had to bite his tongue, mop in hand, as Linda strolled past him without a second glance. It was moments like these that made him realize just how dangerous unchecked power could be. Linda was not just a harsh manager. She was crushing the very people who could help the company thrive. That afternoon, during his lunch break, Charles sat alone in the staff cafeteria, picking at a sandwich. He felt an odd sense of relief in being invisible here, no one to pander to him or to watch their words. Around him, the room buzzed with conversation. One group of employees, a mix of IT staff and customer service reps, were talking about weekend plans. Others quietly worked on laptops, trying to finish up tasks. Charles's attention was pulled toward a man sitting a few tables away, slumped over his food. He recognized him from earlier interactions. Paul, a tech support specialist, who had helped set up Charles's personal office computer a few years back. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, and dark circles marking his skin. No one else seemed to notice. A few minutes later, Carl, the janitor who had trained Charles, sat down next to him. Carl noticed Paul, too, and gave Charles a knowing look. "That guy's been working himself to the bone," Carl muttered, biting into an apple. "Management keeps pushing him to do more with less, all while ignoring how stretched he is." Charles frowned. "He seems burned out. Does anyone help him?" Carl shook his head, chewing thoughtfully. "Not really. I've seen it before. They promise more staff, better hours, but it never comes. He's too afraid to complain, though. They'll just call him lazy or tell him to suck it up." This was exactly the kind of culture Charles feared had taken root. The grind was praised, but the well-being of employees was disregarded. Paul was just one example, but how many others were being pushed to their breaking point while those at the top sat comfortably in their corner offices? "I wish there was more I could do for him," Carl continued, "but I'm just the janitor." Charles met his eyes, his heart heavy with the knowledge that Carl was more than just a janitor. He was part of the soul of this company, someone who saw more than most because of his position. But no one would listen to Carl's concerns, and that was a problem Charles had allowed to exist for far too long. 2 days later, Charles found himself cleaning near the finance department when he overheard another conversation that would confirm his worst fears. Linda was in a heated discussion with one of her fellow managers, Rick, the head of finance. They stood just outside a conference room, oblivious to Charles's presence as he wiped down a nearby counter. "I don't care what the employee surveys say," Linda snapped, her voice low but sharp. "These people need to toughen up. If they can't handle the pressure, they don't belong here." Rick, a taller man with graying hair, crossed his arms defensively. "Linda, we've had complaints about you for months now. The way you treat your team is unacceptable. We're going to lose good people if you keep this up." Linda scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "Lose good people? They're lucky to even have jobs in this economy. They need me to keep them in line. If they don't like it, they can leave. I'm not here to coddle anyone." Rick sighed, shaking his head. "You don't get it. This isn't just about productivity, it's about morale. You're creating a toxic environment, and it's affecting everyone." Linda's face hardened. "Morale? Please, I get results. That's what this company needs." The conversation was cut short as they both walked off toward a meeting, leaving Charles standing in stunned silence. It was one thing to hear whispers of toxicity, but it was another to see it so blatantly justified. Linda's words echoed in his mind. "I get results. That's what this company needs." No, Charles thought to himself. What this company needed was leadership with empathy. Leadership that didn't see employees as cogs in a machine, but as people with lives, struggles, and potential. Later that evening, Charles returned home, his body tired, but his mind racing. Monica was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and she greeted him with a warm smile when he walked in. "How was your day, David?" she teased, using his undercover name. Charles chuckled, but the weariness in his voice was clear. "Exhausting. I had to listen to more of Linda's venom, and I've seen firsthand how the culture's gone toxic. It's worse than I thought. Monica turned toward him, concern in her eyes. What are you going to do? You can't keep watching this unfold without doing something. Charles ran a hand over his beard, deep in thought. I need to see a little more, but I'm close. I've gathered enough to know where the problems are, but I have to be smart about how I handle it. I can't just fire Linda and hope that fixes everything. It's deeper than that. Charles smiled at his wife, grateful for her support. I know, and I will. But first, I need to let this play out just a little longer. Charles, still disguised as David, found himself deeper in the company's inner workings than he ever anticipated. Each day offered new revelations, both heartbreaking and infuriating. The employees who were struggling remained voiceless, while those in power continued to wield it with little concern for the well-being of their teams. And Linda, more than anyone, exemplified the very culture he now knew had to change. By the third week of his undercover journey, Charles had learned a few things. First, the kindness within the company wasn't entirely extinguished. People like Sandra from IT and Carl the janitor showed him there was still hope. But the stories of Linda's behavior, her ruthless treatment of subordinates, the toxic meetings, the constant pressure she placed on her team, seemed to worsen with each passing day. Today, Charles felt a shift in the air. As he made his way to the marketing department, he noticed a sense of tension rippling through the office. Employees sat at their desks with hunched shoulders, fingers tapping nervously on keyboards. Conversations were clipped, and even the normally lively break room was unusually silent. Something was brewing. He had just finished cleaning a row of cubicles when he overheard the faint sound of someone crying. He followed the noise, carefully rounding a corner, and saw Ava, the junior associate from marketing, huddled near the copy machine, her face buried in her hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she was shaking uncontrollably. Charles's heart sank. He had seen her being berated by Linda a few times now, and each time she seemed to be barely holding herself together. But this was different. This wasn't just frustration. This was defeat. Before he could say anything, Sandra, the IT specialist, walked by and immediately rushed to Ava's side. Ava, what's wrong? Sandra asked softly, kneeling beside her. Ava shook her head, struggling to form words. I can't do this anymore, Sandra. I'm not good enough. Linda, she said I'm worthless, that my work is embarrassing. I've tried so hard, but nothing's ever good enough for her. Sandra's face hardened. That's not true, Ava. You're talented, and everyone knows it. Don't let Linda make you feel like this. Ava looked up, her eyes red and swollen. But she's right. I'm just dragging the team down. I can't take it anymore. I'm thinking about quitting. Charles, listening from the shadows, felt his anger flare. How many more people had Linda driven to this point? How many others had quietly left the company because they couldn't handle her toxic leadership? He wanted to step in, to comfort Ava, to tell her that things would change, but he couldn't, at least not yet. Later that day, Charles found himself assigned to clean the conference room where one of Linda's team meetings was about to take place. As he set up his cleaning supplies, he heard the familiar click of Linda's heels echoing down the hallway. She entered the room, followed by her team, including Ava, who looked even more fragile than before. Charles kept his head down as the meeting began, pretending to dust off the large table at the far end of the room. From this position, he could hear everything. So, we're behind on our deadlines again, Linda began, her tone sharp and biting. I don't know why this is such a difficult concept for you people to grasp. Deadlines are non-negotiable. We're not here to coddle anyone. This is business, and if you can't handle it, maybe you should reconsider your place in this company. The room was silent. Charles glanced up, noticing how everyone avoided eye contact with Linda, their faces a mix of fear and resignation. Ava, Linda continued, zeroing in on her target, would you care to explain why your campaign proposal was so subpar? I mean, honestly, this is the kind of work I'd expect from an intern, not a marketing associate. Ava's face paled. She opened her mouth to respond, but faltered, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Linda. I'll try to do better. Linda scoffed. Try? Trying isn't good enough. You need to deliver. Do you even understand how much is riding on this campaign? Do you have any idea the pressure we're under to meet our targets? If you can't keep up, maybe it's time you think about your future here. The words hung in the air like poison. Charles could see Ava trembling, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He wanted to stand up, to call Linda out for her cruelty, but he knew that his time wasn't right. This was the moment he needed to fully understand the depth of the problem. Linda continued the meeting as if nothing had happened, going over numbers and projections with the cold efficiency of someone who saw her team as mere tools for her success. The rest of the employees remained silent, nodding along but saying nothing. The fear in the room was palpable. After the meeting, as the room cleared out, Charles remained behind to finish his cleaning. His mind was racing. Linda's behavior wasn't just aggressive, it was abusive, and the silence of those around her showed just how entrenched the culture of fear had become. As he wiped down the last chair, Carl entered the room with a knowing look. "Rough meeting, huh?" Carl asked, leaning on his broom. Charles nodded. "You could say that," Carl sighed. "Linda's been like that for years. Everyone knows it, but no one does anything. It's like they're all scared to lose their jobs or something." Charles clenched his jaw. "Someone needs to do something." Carl chuckled, though it was a humorless sound. "Yeah, well, good luck with that. People like her don't change. She's got too much power. Even the higher-ups let her get away with it. They just care about the bottom line." Charles paused, staring at the older man. What if someone could change things? Carl raised an eyebrow. Someone? Who? The CEO? Good luck getting through to him. He's probably too busy enjoying his millions to care about what's happening down here. Charles felt the weight of Carl's words. The irony was almost unbearable. Here he was, the CEO Carl thought was unreachable, standing in front of him, trying to figure out how to save his own company. But Carl didn't know that. None of them did. And soon, that would change. That evening, Charles returned home, his thoughts heavy. Monica, as always, was waiting for him in the kitchen, her eyes lighting up when she saw him walk through the door. But tonight, she could tell something was different. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down a glass of water for him. Charles ran a hand over his face, the stress evident in his expression. "It's worse than I thought, Monica. So much worse. People are suffering under Linda's leadership. She's ruining careers, breaking people's spirits. Ava, she's on the verge of quitting, and no one is doing anything about it." Monica's face softened with concern. "You knew it was bad, Charles, but you couldn't have known how deep it went." "I know," Charles replied, his voice low. "But now that I've seen it, I can't just let this continue. I need to take action." Monica reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You will, and when you do, this company will be better for it. But you need to be smart about how you do it. Don't let your emotions get in the way." Charles nodded, taking in her words. She was right. He couldn't let his anger dictate his next moves. He had to be strategic, calculated. The culture of his company had to be uprooted, and that would take more than just firing Linda. It was time to make his plan, and when he revealed who he really was, everything would change. Charles spent the next few days solidifying his plan. He knew that a simple reveal of his true identity wouldn't be enough to change the deeply rooted issues within the company. The problems ran far deeper than Linda's abusive behavior, touching every level of management and the toxic culture that had seeped into the core of his organization. His plan would need to address not just the symptoms, but the cause. Monica's words stayed with him. "Don't let your emotions get in the way." And she was right. As much as Charles wanted to storm into the office and expose Linda, he had to be methodical. He needed evidence, witnesses, and, most importantly, he needed to show the rest of his leadership team what was truly happening under their noses. He spent the weekend outlining a strategy. Step 1 was clear: gather documentation. Linda wasn't just a bully, she was reckless. She left behind a trail of emails, performance reviews, and complaints that Charles had access to as CEO. But it wasn't just about her. He needed to identify the other key players contributing to the company's deteriorating culture. On Monday, Charles arrived at work early, still wearing his janitor's uniform. Today felt different. There was a palpable tension in the air, as if the company itself was holding its breath. He wasn't sure if it was his own nerves or if something had shifted within the building, but either way, he felt the weight of what was about to happen. His first stop was the office of Rick, the head of finance, who had once confronted Linda about her toxic leadership. Charles had seen Rick's frustration, his attempts to speak up only to be dismissed. He had the potential to be an ally. Charles knocked on Rick's door, still in character as David the janitor. Rick looked up, momentarily confused. "Yes?" Rick asked, adjusting his glasses. Charles stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He had been rehearsing this conversation in his head all weekend. "Rick, I know you don't know me very well, but I've been working here for the past few weeks, observing." Rick raised an eyebrow, still puzzled. "Observing what, exactly?" Charles hesitated for a moment, then dropped the act. "My name isn't David. It's Charles McAllister. I'm the CEO of this company." Rick's eyes widened, and for a moment, he just stared at Charles in stunned silence. "What?" Rick finally managed to say. You're the CEO?" Charles nodded. "I went undercover to see what was really happening in my company, and I've seen enough to know that something is deeply wrong here, Rick. I know you've tried to confront Linda before. I overheard your conversation with her, but it's not just Linda. The entire leadership structure has become toxic, and I need to fix it." Rick leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. "You went undercover? As a janitor?" "I had to see it for myself. I couldn't trust the reports or the numbers anymore. I needed to know how my employees were really being treated." Rick let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "I've seen CEOs do a lot of things, but I've never seen one go undercover. I don't even know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Charles replied, "but I need your help. You've seen firsthand how Linda operates. I know there are others in leadership who are letting this happen. We need to document everything, every instance of abuse, every complaint that's been swept under the rug." Rick nodded slowly, the gears in his mind turning. "I've got records, emails, performance reviews, HR complaints. It's all there, but no one's done anything about it. It's like they're scared of her." "That's going to change," Charles said firmly. "But we need to do this carefully. If I just fire Linda without addressing the bigger issue, the same problems will come back. I need to show the board, the executives, and the employees what's really happening. We have to make it undeniable." Rick leaned forward, his expression serious now. "I'm in. Linda's been untouchable for too long, but she's not the only one. There are others in leadership who are just as bad, even if they're more subtle about it." Charles nodded. "Exactly. And when we take this to the board, we need them to see the full picture. This isn't just about one bad manager. It's about a culture that's been allowed to fester. We need to overhaul the entire system." With Rick on board, Charles moved to the next phase of his plan. Over the next few days, he quietly met with other employees who had been affected by Linda's leadership, gathering their stories and ensuring that they felt supported. He reached out to HR, requesting every complaint filed against her over the past few years. The stack of documents that began to accumulate was staggering. Formal complaints, emails detailing abusive behavior, performance reviews that were clearly biased. One afternoon, he approached Carl in the janitor's lounge. Carl had been one of the first people to show him the truth about the company, and Charles knew he couldn't leave him out of the plan. "Hey, Carl," Charles said, sitting down beside him during a break. Carl looked up from his newspaper, giving Charles a nod. "Hey, David, how's it going?" Charles paused for a moment, then sighed. "There's something I need to tell you. My name isn't David. I'm Charles McAllister. I'm the CEO of this company." Carl froze, staring at Charles as if he'd just spoken another language. "You're the CEO?" Charles nodded. "I went undercover as a janitor to see how the company was really running. I've seen the way people like Linda treat their teams, and I've seen how much you care about this place. I owe you an apology, Carl. I should have been paying more attention." Carl blinked, still processing. "You're kidding me, right?" "I'm not. I need your help, Carl. I've already got Rick from finance on board, and I'm collecting evidence. but we need to make sure that when I reveal who I am, we've got enough to take action." Carl stared at him for a long moment, then let out a low chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned. All this time, I thought you were just another guy trying to make ends meet. But you're telling me you're the big boss." "That's right," Charles replied, smiling slightly. Carl leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "You know what? I'm in. Someone's got to stand up for the little guy around here, and if you're really serious about changing things, I'll back you up." By the end of the week, Charles had everything he needed: documentation, testimonies, and a team of allies willing to stand by his side. The day of his reveal was fast approaching, and he could feel the tension building within the company. Word had spread that something was happening, though no one knew exactly what. Charles knew that once he revealed himself, there would be no going back. He would have to face the board, the executives, and the employees. He would have to explain how things had gotten so bad under his watch, but he was ready. He had seen the truth, and now it was time to take action. That evening, as he sat at the dinner table with Monica, she could sense the shift in him. His usually calm demeanor had been replaced with a focused intensity. "You're ready, aren't you?" she asked, smiling softly. Charles nodded. "I am. Tomorrow everything changes." Monica reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "I'm proud of you, Charles. You've seen the worst of what's happening, and now you're doing something about it. This company needs you more than ever." Charles smiled, though the weight of the coming day sat heavy on his shoulders. "I just hope I'm not too late." Monica's eyes softened. "You're not. You're exactly on time." The day had come. Charles woke up early, a mix of anticipation and nerves twisting in his stomach. Today, he would finally reveal himself. After weeks of witnessing the toxic culture, the abuse, and the struggles of his employees, it was time to expose the truth and begin the process of healing his company. As he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his suit, Charles caught a glimpse of himself, the man behind the disguise. No longer David, the janitor. Today, he would walk into the building as Charles McAllister, the CEO, but with a new understanding of what his employees endured every day. He was no longer blind to the broken culture, and while the revelations had been painful, they had given him the clarity and conviction he needed. Monica appeared in the doorway, her eyes scanning him. "You're ready," she said softly. Charles took a deep breath and nodded. "I am." She walked over, gently adjusting his tie. "Remember, you've seen the truth now. You're not just the CEO anymore. You're their advocate. This is your chance to change everything." Charles smiled at her, grateful for her unwavering support. "Thanks, Monica. I couldn't have done this without you." She kissed his cheek. "Go show them who you really are." When Charles arrived at the office, he felt the weight of the moment bearing down on him. The employees carried on with their work, unaware of what was about to happen. He passed familiar faces, people he had gotten to know as David, the ones who had opened up to him about their struggles. They gave him polite smiles, still thinking he was just a janitor. He walked straight to the boardroom, where he had scheduled an all-hands meeting with the senior leadership team. The heads of each department were already there, including Rick from finance, who gave Charles a knowing nod. And then there was Linda, seated near the center of the long conference table, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Charles stepped inside the room, and the quiet murmur of conversation died down. Everyone looked at him, confused. Why was the janitor in this meeting? Charles paused for a moment, allowing the tension to build, before he finally spoke. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Charles McAllister." There was a beat of silence, followed by a ripple of confusion. Linda looked at him with furrowed brows, clearly annoyed. "What is this?" she snapped. "Why is the janitor speaking in our meeting?" Charles held her gaze, calm and steady. "I'm not the janitor, Linda. I'm the CEO." The room went utterly silent. Shock flashed across the faces of everyone at the table. Linda blinked, her mouth slightly agape, her mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. "What?" she stammered. You're the CEO?" Charles nodded. Yes, for the past few weeks, I've been working undercover as David the janitor to observe the true culture of my company. I wanted to see what was happening beneath the surface, how employees were really being treated, and what I found was alarming. He let his words hang in the air, watching as Linda's face drained of color. Some of the other managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others looked as though they wanted to melt into the floor. I witnessed acts of kindness and integrity, Charles continued. But I also saw toxic leadership, abuse, and fear. Employees who are too afraid to speak up because they know it won't change anything. And the person responsible for much of this toxicity is sitting right here in this room. He turned his attention directly to Linda, who looked as though she might explode. Her eyes narrowed, and she opened her mouth to defend herself, but Charles cut her off before she could speak. I've seen how you treat your team, Linda. I've heard the way you talk to them, belittle them, and push them to the breaking point. Ava, one of the brightest young talents in this company, is on the verge of quitting because of the way you've made her feel, worthless and defeated, and she's not the only one. Linda's face turned an angry shade of red. I don't know what you're talking about, she hissed. I'm just doing my job. If people can't handle the pressure, that's their problem. This is business, not daycare. Charles shook his head, his voice low but firm. No, Linda, that's where you're wrong. This is a business, but we're also responsible for the people who work here. The way you've treated your team is unacceptable, and it stops today. The room was still. No one dared speak. Linda sat back in her chair, her arms crossed defensively, but it was clear that her authority had just been shattered. Charles turned to the rest of the leadership team. Over the past few weeks, I've gathered documentation, emails, performance reviews, HR complaints, all of it. What I've seen is a systemic failure in leadership, and that's on me. I allowed this to happen because I wasn't paying attention, but that ends now. Rick nodded, supporting Charles's words. It's true. We've been allowing this kind of behavior to slide for too long, and it's not just Linda. We have a responsibility to change the way we lead this company. Charles continued, his voice resolute. Effective immediately, Linda. You're being placed on administrative leave while we conduct a formal investigation. I've already spoken to HR and the legal team. You will not be returning to this company. Linda's face twisted with rage. You can't do this. I've been here for years. I can, and I will, Charles said firmly. This company will no longer tolerate abusive leadership. The culture here needs to change, and it starts with accountability. Linda stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back with a loud screech. You'll regret this, she spat, storming out of the room. The tension in the air eased slightly as she left, but Charles knew this was just the beginning. He turned back to the rest of the leadership team, their faces a mix of relief and uncertainty. This isn't just about Linda, Charles said, his tone softer now but still determined. This is about changing the entire culture of our company. We need to rebuild trust with our employees. We need to create an environment where people feel safe, respected, and valued. The heads of the other departments exchanged glances, clearly shaken by what had just transpired. But there was also a sense of hope, a recognition that things could finally get better. Rick spoke up again. I think we've all seen the problems, but no one wanted to take action. Now that we're here, we need to be part of the solution. Charles nodded. Exactly. I'm going to be meeting with each of you individually to discuss what changes need to happen in your departments. We're going to implement new policies that promote inclusivity, respect, and transparency. And I'm personally going to be more involved in the day-to-day operations to make sure that the culture we're building is the one we all want to work in. The meeting concluded, and as the room emptied, Charles sat back in his chair, exhaling deeply. The hardest part was over, but the real work was just beginning. He had revealed himself, held Linda accountable, and set the stage for change. Now, he needed to follow through on his promises. Later that day, Charles walked the familiar path to the janitor's closet. Carl was there, cleaning out a mop bucket, humming to himself. When he saw Charles, his face lit up with a grin. Well, if it isn't Mr. CEO himself, Carl said with a chuckle. Charles smiled. Carl, I couldn't have done this without you. Carl waved him off. I didn't do much. You're the one who had the guts to go undercover and see what was really going on. Charles leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. Still, you opened my eyes to a lot. I owe you. Carl shrugged. Just glad you're doing something about it. This company's needed a shakeup for a long time. Charles nodded. And that's exactly what's going to happen. But it won't be easy. Change never is, Carl said wisely. But it's worth it. Charles smiled again, feeling a sense of renewed purpose. He had taken the first step, and now it was time to lead his company into a better future, one where every employee felt seen, heard, and respected. The days following Charles's revelation were a whirlwind. News of Linda's departure rippled through the company, causing a mixture of relief and apprehension among the employees. Charles felt a sense of urgency to solidify the changes he had promised, but he also understood that it would take time to rebuild trust and morale. By the end of the week, he had scheduled meetings with each department to discuss their needs and concerns. His first meeting was with the marketing team, the very department that had been so deeply affected by Linda's leadership. As he entered the conference room, the atmosphere was a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Ava was there, sitting at the table with her colleagues, her eyes wide as they fell on Charles. He took a deep breath, reminded of the fragility he had witnessed in her and others like her. Thank you all for being here, he began, his voice steady. I know this past week has been challenging, and I want to ensure you that we're moving forward together. I'm here to listen, to understand, and to implement changes that will make this a better workplace for everyone. Ava was the first to speak, her voice soft but steady. It's hard to believe that things are actually changing. For a long time, we felt like we were just trying to survive. Charles nodded. I understand. I've heard your stories, and I want you to know that your experiences matter. No one should feel afraid to speak up or contribute. I want this team to feel empowered and supported. One of the senior marketing associates, Derek, leaned forward. What about our projects? We were under constant pressure to deliver results, often at the expense of our mental health. How can we change that? Charles smiled, grateful for the question. I'm working on implementing policies that prioritize work-life balance. This includes realistic deadlines and the resources you need to succeed. I want you to feel that you can innovate without fear of punitive consequences. The room buzzed with cautious optimism, and Charles could sense a shift in energy. He continued, discussing his vision for a more inclusive and respectful workplace. As he spoke, he made sure to emphasize the importance of feedback from every level of the organization. After the meeting, Charles made his way to the break room, where he found Carl sipping coffee and chatting with a few employees. The atmosphere was noticeably lighter, laughter filling the air in a way it hadn't in a long time. Hey, Charles, Carl called out, waving him over. The folks here are pretty excited about what you've been saying. Charles grinned, feeling buoyed by the camaraderie. It's encouraging to hear that. It's just the beginning, but we need to keep this momentum going. Ava stepped forward, her smile genuine. I can't believe you're really doing this. It feels like a weight has been lifted. It's nice to be heard for a change. Carl chimed in. You're right, Ava. And I think a lot of folks around here are ready to contribute. There's a hunger for change. Charles nodded. That's what we need, a collaborative approach. I want to form committees within each department, groups that will help me understand the specific challenges you face and brainstorm solutions together. The employees exchanged glances, a spark of enthusiasm igniting. Count me in, Ava said with a determined smile. I'd love to help create a positive environment for all of us. I'm in too, Derek added, a newfound energy in his voice. We can finally work together without fear. Charles felt a surge of hope. This was exactly what he wanted, employees taking ownership of their workplace culture. He spent the rest of the afternoon engaging with various teams, listening to their ideas and concerns. Each interaction reinforced his belief that real change was possible. A week later, Charles held an all-hands meeting to formally announce the establishment of the new committees. The atmosphere in the room was electric, the energy palpable. Employees filled the seats, eager to hear about the future. Thank you all for gathering here today, he began, standing at the front of the room, a smile on his face. I'm excited to announce a new initiative, our Employee Empowerment Committees. Each department will have a committee dedicated to fostering a positive culture, addressing concerns, and ensuring everyone feels valued and heard. The room erupted in applause, a wave of excitement washing over them. Charles continued, "These committees will not just be a formality. They will have the power to influence decisions and contribute to our strategy moving forward. I want your voices to shape the direction of this company." Ava raised her hand, her face beaming with enthusiasm. "Will there be training on how to facilitate these discussions? It might help everyone feel more comfortable sharing their thoughts." "Absolutely," Charles replied. "We will provide training for everyone involved, focusing on communication, collaboration, and conflict resolution. We want this to be a safe space for honest dialogue." Derek added, "What about accountability? How will we ensure that everyone, including leadership, is held responsible for maintaining this culture?" Charles met his gaze, impressed with his insight. "That's an excellent point. We'll implement regular feedback sessions where all employees can voice their concerns anonymously. Additionally, I'll be holding quarterly reviews to assess our progress and address any issues that arise." The applause grew louder, and Charles felt a swell of pride. This was what he had envisioned, a culture of openness, where every employee played a part in shaping their environment. As the meeting concluded, employees mingled, excitedly discussing their roles in the new committees. Charles found himself surrounded by a group of employees, eager to share their ideas. He felt a warmth in his heart, knowing that they were moving towards something meaningful. As he turned to leave, he spotted Rick standing in the corner, watching the enthusiasm unfold with a smile. Charles approached him, a sense of gratitude bubbling up. "Thanks for your support, Rick. I couldn't have done this without you." Rick chuckled, shaking his head. "You did this, Charles. You took the risk and opened the door for change. I just pointed out a few things along the way." "Still, I appreciate it," Charles replied sincerely. "Together, we can make this company a place where everyone feels they belong." As the weeks passed, Charles watched as the committees took shape, fostering a renewed sense of purpose within the company. He received reports filled with ideas, initiatives, and a commitment to change that left him both impressed and hopeful. But not everyone was on board. While many embraced the changes, there were still whispers of dissent. Some employees remained skeptical, fearing that the culture of fear would return. Charles knew he had to address those concerns head-on. One afternoon, as he walked through the office, he overheard a small group of employees discussing their apprehensions about the new initiatives. Charles paused, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before approaching them. "Hey, everyone," he said, smiling. "I couldn't help but overhear. I want to hear your concerns." The group exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Finally, one employee spoke up. "It's great that we're trying to change things, but what if it's just lip service? We've been promised change before, and it didn't happen." Charles nodded, understanding their skepticism. "That's a valid concern. Change takes time, and it's natural to be cautious. But I'm committed to following through on my promises. I won't let this become another cycle of false hope. I want you all to hold me accountable." Another employee chimed in. "What if Linda comes back? What's to stop her from undermining all of this?" Charles took a deep breath, knowing this was a crucial moment. "Linda is not coming back. I've made it clear to the board that we will not tolerate abusive leadership, but I understand the fear of reverting to the old ways. That's why I want your feedback to be a regular part of our culture. You deserve to feel safe in speaking up." The group seemed to soften a bit, and Charles sensed that his honesty resonated with them. "Let's work together to build a culture of trust where everyone can express their concerns without fear. It's going to take time, but we can make this happen." As he left the conversation, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for the challenge. He had taken the first steps toward change, and together with his team, he would create a workplace where everyone felt empowered and valued. With the establishment of the Employee Empowerment Committees, the atmosphere within the company continued to evolve. Charles felt a sense of urgency to maintain this momentum and ensure that the new culture took root. He made it a point to engage with employees at every level, attending informal gatherings and coffee breaks to discuss their ideas and concerns. One Tuesday morning, as he entered the break room, he was greeted by a vibrant buzz of conversation. Groups huddled together, animatedly discussing their projects and sharing laughter. The air was thick with a newfound energy that had been missing for far too long. "Good morning, everyone," Charles called out, his enthusiasm infectious. He grabbed a cup of coffee and joined a table where a few members of the marketing committee sat, including Ava and Derek. "Hey, Charles," Ava said, her eyes sparkling. "We were just talking about some ideas for our upcoming campaign. It's exciting to finally brainstorm together without fear." Charles smiled, leaning in to listen. "I'd love to hear what you've come up with. Collaboration is key." Derek chimed in. "We're thinking of launching a campaign focused on community engagement. We want to highlight the voices of our employees and how their experiences shape our company culture." "That sounds fantastic," Charles replied, genuinely impressed. "Featuring employee stories will not only showcase our commitment to inclusivity, but also strengthen our brand identity. How can I support you?" Ava exchanged glances with her teammates, her confidence growing. "We'd like to involve more employees in the creative process, maybe host some workshops where everyone can contribute ideas." Charles nodded, fully supportive. "Let's set that up. I'll help promote the workshops and ensure everyone feels invited to participate. This is a great way to foster creativity and collaboration across departments." As the conversation flowed, Charles could feel the excitement in the room. It was contagious, and he felt a wave of hope wash over him. This was what he had envisioned, a workplace where ideas flourished and everyone felt valued. A few days later, Charles decided to host a town hall meeting, inviting all employees to discuss their experiences with the new initiatives and share any concerns they might still have. He wanted to create an open forum where everyone felt safe to express their thoughts. As he prepared for the meeting, he reviewed feedback collected from the committees. Most responses were overwhelmingly positive, yet there were still some employees who felt unsure about the long-term effects of the changes. When the day arrived, the auditorium was packed. Employees filled the seats, their faces a mix of excitement and anxiety. Charles took the stage, his heart racing as he surveyed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady but warm. "Today is about you, your voices, your experiences, and your hopes for our company's future. We've made significant strides, but I know there's still work to be done." A hand shot up in the audience, and Charles gestured for the employee to speak. It was Marisol from Finance, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I appreciate the changes, Charles, but I'm worried that once the novelty wears off, things might revert back to the way they were. How can we ensure that doesn't happen?" "That's a great question, Marisol," Charles replied, nodding. "Accountability is crucial. I'm committed to regular check-ins and feedback sessions to gauge how we're doing and to adjust our approach as needed. Change requires continuous effort, and I'm here for that." Another voice piped up from the back of the room. "And what about leadership training? How will we make sure our managers are equipped to support this culture?" Charles smiled, glad to see engagement. "We're developing a comprehensive leadership training program focused on empathy, communication, and inclusivity. I want to ensure that every leader in this company understands the importance of fostering a supportive environment." As more questions were raised, Charles felt a wave of gratitude. Employees were willing to engage, to challenge him, and to hold him accountable. It was a sign of a healthy culture in the making. After the meeting, a group of employees lingered, discussing the topics that had been raised. Charles approached them, eager to hear their thoughts. "I liked how you addressed our concerns," said Tom from HR, "but I'm still nervous about the transition. It's a big change." "I get that," Charles replied. "Transitioning to a new culture isn't easy, but I'm committed to being transparent throughout this process. Your feedback is essential, and I want you to know that I'm here to listen." Ava stepped forward, her determination palpable. "I think if we can create small wins along the way, It'll help build trust. Maybe we can celebrate our successes more visibly? That's a fantastic idea, Charles said, his eyes lighting up. Let's make it a point to highlight achievements, big or small, during our monthly meetings. Celebrating progress is important for morale. The group nodded in agreement, the excitement bubbling back to the surface. As the weeks turned into months, Charles felt the culture continuing to shift. The committees were now fully operational, producing tangible initiatives that were making a difference. Employees were engaged, sharing their stories and collaborating more effectively. But one afternoon, as he sat in his office, he received an urgent message from HR. There had been complaints about one of the managers in the operations department. "Charles, we need to talk about Jeff," Monica said, her expression serious as she entered his office. "Several employees have come forward with concerns about his management style. They feel intimidated and belittled." Charles frowned, disappointment settling in. "I thought we were making progress. Why hasn't this been addressed sooner?" Monica sighed. "I understand your frustration, but change takes time. Jeff has been here a long time, and while he's a strong performer, his leadership style hasn't adapted to the new culture we're trying to foster." "We can't let this slide," Charles said, determination hardening in his voice. "We need to address this head-on. Set up a meeting with him and include HR. It's crucial that we hold every leader accountable for their behavior." Monica nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll arrange it immediately." The following week, Charles met with Jeff and HR in a conference room. Jeff entered, his posture relaxed, completely unaware of the storm brewing. "Thanks for coming, Jeff," Charles said, his tone professional yet firm. "We need to discuss some feedback we've received regarding your management style." Jeff's demeanor shifted slightly, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Feedback? What kind of feedback?" Charles leaned forward, ready to confront the issue directly. "Employees have expressed feeling belittled and intimidated in your presence. This is not acceptable, especially given our commitment to creating a supportive environment." Jeff frowned, confusion evident. "I don't understand. I push my team to achieve results. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" "Results matter, but not at the expense of your team's well-being," Charles replied firmly. "Leadership is about fostering a safe space for collaboration. Your approach has caused fear, and that needs to change." Jeff crossed his arms defensively. "But my team is performing well. I don't see the problem." Monica intervened, her voice calm but assertive. "Jeff, performance shouldn't come at the cost of employee satisfaction. We need to help you adapt your leadership style to align with our new culture." Charles nodded in agreement. "We're going to provide you with resources and training to support this transition. It's important that you understand the impact your words and actions have on your team." The tension in the room was palpable as Jeff processed their words. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I'll try to do better. I didn't realize it was affecting my team like this." Charles felt a flicker of hope. "That's all we can ask for. Acknowledging the need for change is the first step. We'll check in regularly to ensure you're supported throughout this process." As they concluded the meeting, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. It was challenging to address difficult issues, but it was essential to uphold the values they were striving to instill within the company. He knew the path would be filled with obstacles, but with every step, they were moving closer to a culture of inclusivity and respect. In the weeks that followed the meeting with Jeff, Charles became increasingly aware of the intricate web of dynamics at play within the company. Each interaction he had, whether in the break room or during formal meetings, revealed layers of complexity, how employees felt about their roles, their managers, and the changes being implemented. One morning, while sipping his coffee, Charles glanced at a new bulletin board that had been set up in the break room. It was filled with colorful post-it notes showcasing employees' achievements, project highlights, and personal milestones. It was a simple initiative led by the employee empowerment committees, but it made a profound impact. "Hey, Charles," Ava greeted him, entering the break room with a bright smile. "Did you see the board? We're calling it the Celebration Wall. It's already filling up." Charles smiled back, his heart warmed by the enthusiasm. "I love it. It's a great way to recognize everyone's contributions. How has the response been?" Surprisingly positive, she replied. People are really getting into it. It's nice to see employees feeling appreciated. As they chatted, Derek walked in, joining the conversation. Ava's right. The celebration wall is a hit. We're planning to feature a Team Member of the Month soon. It'll be a fun way to spotlight someone who exemplifies our values. Fantastic idea, Charles said, his excitement matching theirs. Recognizing individual contributions can foster a sense of belonging and motivation. Later that afternoon, Charles met with the HR team to discuss the ongoing feedback regarding leadership and accountability. They needed to establish a system that encouraged transparency and responsibility across all levels. Thanks for coming, everyone, he began, taking his seat at the conference table. I want to ensure we have a clear plan for how we hold ourselves accountable as we continue to foster this new culture. What have you all observed in the past weeks? Monica, who had been instrumental in gathering feedback, spoke up first. Overall, employees are feeling more comfortable sharing their thoughts, but there's still hesitance regarding leadership. We need to ensure that managers are actively participating in this shift. Exactly, Charles replied. We can't afford to let anyone slip back into old habits. I propose implementing 360-degree feedback sessions for all managers. This would allow their teams to provide anonymous feedback about their leadership styles and effectiveness. That's a great idea, said Rick, the head of HR. It promotes transparency and encourages leaders to reflect on their impact. But we also need to make sure there's a follow-up process to address any concerns raised. Charles nodded thoughtfully. We should establish regular check-ins after these feedback sessions to discuss any issues and create action plans. It's vital that leaders understand the importance of this feedback and are held accountable for making necessary changes. As they brainstormed ways to implement the new system, Charles felt a surge of determination. This was the heart of transformation, creating an environment where everyone, especially those in leadership, could grow and adapt. The following week, Charles rolled out the 360-degree feedback initiative, announcing it during a company-wide meeting. Employees listened intently as he explained the purpose and importance of the process. I believe that feedback is a gift, Charles stated, standing confidently before the crowd. And by providing your honest insights, you'll help us shape our leadership to better align with our culture of inclusivity and respect. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Employees were eager to participate, excited by the prospect of having a voice in how leadership could improve. As the feedback sessions progressed, Charles found himself increasingly engaged in the process. He read through the responses with an open mind, making notes of common themes and areas that needed attention. One afternoon, while reviewing feedback about Jeff, Charles noticed a pattern. Many employees acknowledged that while he was results-oriented, they felt his approach was often dismissive, especially during team meetings. Charles called for a follow-up meeting with Jeff to discuss the feedback. When Jeff entered the room, he seemed apprehensive, shifting in his seat as he prepared for what was to come. Thanks for meeting with me, Jeff, Charles began, adopting a supportive tone. I wanted to share some feedback from your team regarding the 360-degree reviews. Jeff nodded, his expression tense. I've been nervous about that. What did they say? They appreciate your dedication to results, Charles replied, choosing his words carefully. However, several employees mentioned feeling dismissed in meetings, and they'd like to see more encouragement and openness to their ideas. Jeff frowned, the weight of the feedback settling on him. I didn't realize it was affecting them like that. I thought I was pushing them to perform. That's understandable, Charles said. But as leaders, it's crucial to create an environment where team members feel comfortable sharing their ideas. It's not just about the results, it's also about how we achieve them. Jeff sighed, running a hand through his hair. I get it. I want to be better. How can I improve? Charles leaned forward, wanting to help him navigate this transition. I suggest starting with one-on-one check-ins with your team members. Ask them for their input on projects and encourage them to voice their thoughts. Make it a point to acknowledge their contributions in meetings, no matter how small. Jeff nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. I can do that. It'll be a shift for me, but I see the value in it. Great, Charles said, feeling a sense of relief. Let's set up a follow-up meeting in a month to check in on your progress. Remember, this is a journey, and it's okay to take small steps. As weeks turned into months, Charles continued to monitor the feedback and progress of the leadership initiatives. The changes weren't always easy. They required hard conversations and accountability. One afternoon, Charles received an unexpected visit from Ava. She entered his office with a serious expression, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Hey, Ava, what's on your mind?" Charles asked, sensing the weight of her visit. "I wanted to talk about the leadership training," she began, her voice steady. "While I think it's a great initiative, I've noticed that some managers are still resistant to change. They're hesitant to participate fully in the training sessions." Charles frowned, concerned. "That's troubling to hear. Which managers are you referring to?" "A few from the operations team," Ava replied, her brow furrowed. "They seem to be stuck in their old ways. It's discouraging because I believe the training could really help them if they'd just embrace it." "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Charles said, his mind racing with possible solutions. "We need to address this head on. It's important for everyone to be on board with this transformation." "I think a team-building exercise might help," Ava suggested, her eyes brightening with inspiration. "If we can get them to work together in a different environment, it could foster camaraderie and open their minds to new ideas." Charles nodded, intrigued. "That's an excellent idea. Let's organize a team-building retreat, somewhere off-site where they can engage in activities that promote trust and collaboration." A week later, Charles and Ava finalized the details for the retreat. They chose a local conference center with plenty of outdoor space for activities. On the day of the retreat, Charles arrived early, excitement bubbling within him. As the managers trickled in, he greeted them warmly, hoping to set a positive tone. "Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you're here today. This retreat is about teamwork and growth. We'll be engaging in activities that challenge us and encourage open communication," he announced, his enthusiasm infectious. The managers exchanged glances, some appearing skeptical, while others seemed intrigued. As the day unfolded, they participated in a series of activities designed to promote collaboration and trust. During one exercise, they were divided into teams and tasked with solving a series of challenges that required creative thinking and cooperation. As the managers worked together, Charles observed a subtle shift in their demeanor. They began to engage with one another, laughing and brainstorming solutions, slowly breaking down the barriers that had previously existed. After a particularly challenging activity, they gathered around for a debriefing session. Charles encouraged each manager to share their thoughts on the experience. "Today was eye-opening," Jeff admitted, his voice reflecting genuine reflection. "I realize now how much I need to rely on my team's strengths rather than trying to do everything myself." Another manager, Lisa, chimed in. "I've been hesitant to embrace change, but seeing how we can work together has shown me that there's real value in listening to our team." As the conversations flowed, Charles felt a surge of hope. This was the transformation he had been striving for, a culture where leaders acknowledged their weaknesses and valued collaboration. By the end of the retreat, the managers were buzzing with energy, filled with new ideas and a shared sense of purpose. Charles knew it was just the beginning, but he felt more confident than ever that they were moving in the right direction. As the managers left the conference center, Charles gathered with Ava and Derek, their expressions reflecting a sense of accomplishment. "Thank you for your hard work on this retreat, Ava," Charles said, smiling. "You played a crucial role in its success." "I'm just glad to see everyone engaging," she replied, her eyes sparkling. "I think this will have a lasting impact." Derek nodded in agreement. "It's all about building relationships. When we connect as a team, we can overcome any challenge." Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but they were making strides toward a more inclusive and respectful workplace. With each step, he was reminded of the power of empathy, communication, and the unwavering spirit of collaboration. The excitement from the team-building retreat lingered in the air for weeks, and Charles felt the company culture shifting. Managers began to embrace the principles they had discussed, and there was a palpable sense of enthusiasm among employees. However, not all was smooth sailing. Underneath the surface, Charles sensed an undercurrent of resistance from some who were still clinging to the old ways. One afternoon, while preparing for a meeting, Charles received an anonymous email that caught his attention. The subject line read, "Concern about culture change." Curious, he opened it and began to read. Dear Charles, while I appreciate the initiatives you've implemented, I am worried that some leaders are not genuinely committed to this change. There are whispers of resentment among certain managers who feel threatened by these new practices. I fear we may be creating a culture of division rather than unity. Charles felt a knot form in his stomach. This was precisely what he feared, resistance from those who felt their authority was being challenged. He knew he needed to address this issue head-on. The following day, Charles called for a leadership meeting, determined to address the growing concerns. As he entered the conference room, he was met with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension from the managers seated around the table. Thank you for coming, everyone, Charles began, his tone serious yet open. I want to talk about the changes we're implementing and the importance of genuine commitment from all of us. I've heard some feedback indicating that not everyone is on board. A few managers exchanged uneasy glances, but Jeff, who had been showing promise since the retreat, spoke up first. I think it's important that we all recognize the value of these changes, but it can be intimidating for those of us who are used to a different style of leadership. Intimidation isn't the goal here, Charles replied firmly. We need to create an environment where everyone feels valued, and that includes our leaders. It's about fostering collaboration rather than competition. Lisa added, I believe we can improve our culture, but some of us are still struggling with the transition. It's hard to shift from years of entrenched practices. I understand, Charles said, nodding empathetically, but we need to commit to this transformation collectively. It's not enough for some of us to engage. We need all leaders to model the behaviors we want to see in our teams. He could see the wheels turning in their heads. There was a mix of realization and defensiveness, but he pressed on. To move forward, I suggest we host a series of open forums where employees can voice their concerns and ideas. This will help us understand the challenges they're facing and how we can collectively support each other. The room fell silent for a moment as they processed the idea. Then Derek spoke up. That's a solid plan. It shows we're willing to listen and adapt, but we have to be ready for some tough conversations. Absolutely, Charles agreed. It's crucial that we face resistance with open hearts and minds. If we want a truly inclusive culture, we must be prepared to address issues as they arise. The next week, Charles organized the first open forum, inviting all employees to share their thoughts. As he stood at the front of the auditorium, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was a chance for honest dialogue, but he also knew that some employees might voice criticism or concern. Thank you all for joining us today, he began, scanning the crowd. This forum is about you, your experiences, your feedback, and your ideas for how we can continue to grow as a company. I want to encourage open and respectful communication. A few hands shot up immediately, and Charles pointed to Marisol, who had been an outspoken advocate for employee rights. Charles, I appreciate that you're willing to listen, she started, her voice steady but passionate. However, I've heard from several colleagues who feel that the changes are only skin deep. They're worried that management won't truly commit to this transformation. Charles nodded, acknowledging her point. That's a valid concern, and I take it seriously. It's not enough to implement policies. We must embody the values we're promoting. What suggestions do you have for us to ensure this commitment? A wave of voices erupted, each employee offering their perspectives. Some suggested mentorship programs, while others highlighted the need for more transparency in decision-making. As they spoke, Charles could sense a collective desire for genuine change. At one point, a quiet voice from the back of the room interrupted the flow. I don't think we can change the culture if certain leaders are still allowed to act in ways that undermine our efforts. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the speaker, a junior analyst named Sam, who had often kept to himself. Charles felt a pang of empathy for him. Speaking up like that took courage. Sam, thank you for sharing that, Charles replied, his voice encouraging. You're right. It's vital that we hold ourselves accountable, and that includes addressing any leaders who may be resistant to change. We're all responsible for fostering this environment together. The dialogue continued, rich with ideas and feelings. Charles felt the energy in the room shift from skepticism to hope as employees began to envision what a truly inclusive culture could look like. After the forum, Charles met with his HR team to discuss the feedback. They reviewed the notes taken during the session, and it became clear that while progress had been made, there was still significant work to do. "Charles, I think we need to address the concerns regarding specific leaders," Monica suggested. "The perception that some managers aren't fully committed could undermine our efforts if we don't tackle it directly." "I agree," Charles said thoughtfully. "We need to communicate clearly that resistance to change won't be tolerated. Every leader must understand that their actions have consequences for the entire company culture. Perhaps we should establish a system of accountability where leaders can be evaluated not just on their results, but also on their commitment to fostering a positive environment," Rick proposed. Charles nodded, envisioning how this could play out. "Let's develop a set of criteria for leadership evaluations that includes feedback from their teams and their participation in initiatives aimed at improving our culture. If a leader is not meeting these standards, we need to have honest conversations about their role." In the following weeks, Charles and his HR team rolled out the new evaluation criteria, emphasizing the importance of commitment to the company's evolving culture. They communicated clearly that this was not just a checkbox exercise, but a genuine effort to ensure alignment between leadership and employee expectations. As they implemented the changes, Charles noticed a gradual shift in attitudes among some managers. Jeff, who had been struggling to adapt, began to actively seek feedback from his team and implement the suggestions they provided. He even started acknowledging individual contributions in meetings, making a point to recognize everyone's efforts. However, not all managers were on board. One afternoon, Charles received an email from Rick indicating that Linda, a manager in the product development department, had expressed strong dissatisfaction with the changes. "Charles, I believe we need to address Linda directly," Rick wrote. "She seems to be undermining the initiatives we've implemented and is resistant to feedback from her team." "Let's set up a meeting with her," Charles replied, feeling a sense of urgency. "It's crucial that we address this resistance before it spreads." The next day, Charles, Rick, and Monica met with Linda in a conference room. She entered with an air of defiance, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. "Thank you for meeting with me, Linda," Charles began, keeping his tone calm but firm. "I wanted to discuss some feedback we've received regarding your management style and your perspective on the recent changes." "What feedback?" she snapped, her defensiveness palpable. "I'm just trying to do my job, and I don't think we need all these changes. It's unnecessary." Charles took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "The feedback indicates that some team members feel intimidated and undervalued in your department. We've been working hard to create a culture of inclusivity, and I believe it's essential for all managers to support this." Linda scoffed. "This is a corporate initiative that doesn't apply to everyone. We need results, and I don't have time to coddle my team. They should be able to handle some pressure." "That's exactly the mindset we need to shift," Monica interjected, her voice steady. "Results are important, but so is creating an environment where employees feel supported. High pressure can lead to burnout and disengagement, which ultimately affects performance. Perhaps you're not recognizing the broader implications of your leadership style," Rick added. "If employees don't feel safe sharing their ideas or concerns, it can lead to a toxic culture, which is detrimental to productivity." Linda's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I didn't mean to create that atmosphere," she muttered, her tone softening slightly. "We're here to help you adapt," Charles said, hoping to encourage her. "We believe in your ability to lead, but it's crucial that you're willing to engage with your team and reflect on how your behavior impacts them." As they continued the conversation, Charles felt a cautious optimism. Perhaps this confrontation would serve as a turning point for Linda, prompting her to consider the implications of her actions and the culture they were striving to build. Weeks passed, and Charles noticed a subtle change in Linda's approach. She began to engage with her team more openly, soliciting their input and making a concerted effort to acknowledge their contributions. While there was still work to be done, it was clear that the discussions had sparked a shift in her mindset. As Charles continued to oversee the evolving culture within the company, he knew there was still much work to be done. Implementing the changes was only half the battle. Sustaining them and ensuring they were embraced across all levels was the real challenge. Over the next few weeks, Charles scheduled regular check-ins with his senior leadership team. Derek had taken on a mentorship role, guiding several department heads through the transition. Charles appreciated Derek's approach, firm but compassionate, reminding leaders that growth often came from discomfort. One morning, after a particularly engaging leadership meeting, Charles found himself walking the floors of the office, just as he had done when undercover. But this time, he walked as the CEO, not the janitor. He moved through the halls with a sense of renewed purpose, observing not just the work, but the people, their interactions, their attitudes, and the energy that flowed between them. In the marketing department, a group of employees were engaged in a brainstorming session. Laughter filled the room as one employee offered a creative idea, and the team bounced off it, building something even more brilliant together. It was the kind of collaborative spirit Charles had longed to see. As he walked past the sales team, he noticed one of the newer managers offering support to an overwhelmed employee, guiding them through a difficult client negotiation with patience and care. Moments like these were small but significant victories. Charles felt a sense of pride watching the seeds of his vision start to take root. He couldn't deny that some departments were still struggling. Linda's team, for instance, remained tense, their morale low despite the efforts to turn things around. But Charles knew that change, real change, took time. Later that day, Charles received an email from HR with updated employee satisfaction reports. The numbers were improving steadily, a testament to the efforts put in place over the past few months. But tucked within the reports were a few red flags, areas where employees still felt disconnected or undervalued. Charles flagged those departments for further investigation, determined not to let them slip through the cracks. By the end of the day, as the office lights dimmed and most employees had gone home, Charles sat at his desk, reflecting. He had come so far, from those first few days sweeping floors in disguise to this moment where his company was beginning to transform into the place he had always envisioned. Yet, he knew this was only the beginning. As he stared out of his window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Charles made a silent vow to keep pushing forward, no matter the resistance. Leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about staying the course, even when the path wasn't clear. The air in the office had begun to shift in a tangible way. Charles could sense the change, not just in the attitudes of his employees, but in the overall energy of the company. The team-building retreat had been a success. The open forums were yielding positive feedback, and many of the leaders were beginning to adapt to the new culture. Yet, Charles knew that real, lasting transformation wasn't something that happened overnight. It required time, effort, and the willingness to confront challenges head-on. And there was a challenge brewing, one that Charles couldn't ignore. It was mid-morning when Derek walked into Charles's office, his expression serious. He held a folder in his hand, and as he approached Charles's desk, he placed it down with a thud. "What's this?" Charles asked, eyeing the folder. "It's about Linda," Derek said, his voice tinged with frustration. "We've been monitoring her progress since our last meeting, and while she's made some small changes, there are still major issues with her leadership. Multiple complaints have come in from her team, and morale in her department is at an all-time low." Charles sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. Linda had always been one of the more difficult managers to work with, even before the company's culture shift. She was fiercely results-driven, which had earned her a reputation for being effective in delivering on targets, but at the cost of employee well-being. Now, despite the efforts to encourage her to adapt, It seemed like old habits were proving hard to break. "What kind of complaints are we talking about?" Charles asked, flipping open the folder. "Some employees feel she's dismissive of their input. Others have reported instances of public berating in meetings," Derek explained. "It's becoming a problem, and I'm worried that if we don't take more decisive action, we'll lose good talent from her department." Charles sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. This was precisely the kind of situation he had hoped to avoid. When he'd gone undercover as a janitor months ago, he had witnessed Linda's harsh treatment of her team firsthand. He had thought that with direct feedback and support, she might change her ways. But now, it was clear that something more needed to be done. "I'll meet with her," Charles finally said, his voice firm. "It's time for a serious conversation." Later that day, Charles summoned Linda to his office. She arrived, her usual air of confidence present, but Charles could tell she wasn't oblivious to the tension in the room. "Thank you for coming, Linda," Charles began, gesturing for her to sit down. He kept his tone professional but stern, knowing this conversation would be crucial. "We need to discuss your leadership approach and the ongoing issues that have been raised by your team." Linda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her arms crossing defensively. "I've been making the changes you suggested," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "I've been trying to engage more with my team and acknowledge their input. But honestly, Charles, some of them just don't have what it takes. They can't handle the pressure." Charles leaned forward, his expression serious. "Linda, this isn't about whether or not your team can handle pressure. It's about the way you lead them. I've received multiple complaints from your department, and the feedback is clear. They feel disrespected, undervalued, and demoralized." Linda's eyes widened slightly, a flash of indignation crossing her face. "I'm pushing them to perform. That's my job. If they can't handle it, maybe they're not the right fit for this company." Charles shook his head, trying to remain calm. "That mindset is part of the problem. We've moved beyond a culture of perform at all costs. We're building an inclusive, supportive environment where employees are encouraged to contribute their best without fear of being torn down. Your team's performance won't improve if they're working in a toxic environment." Linda's expression hardened. "I don't agree with this soft leadership approach, Charles. Results matter. I've delivered results for this company for years, and now you're telling me that's not enough?" "I'm telling you that results aren't everything," Charles said, his voice steady but resolute. "We need leaders who can inspire, support, and develop their teams. Right now, your leadership style is creating more harm than good." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Linda's jaw was clenched, and Charles could see the conflict playing out in her mind. She was a manager who had built her career on being tough and unrelenting, and now she was being asked to completely reframe her approach. It wasn't going to be easy for her to hear. Finally, Linda spoke, her tone defensive, but tinged with uncertainty. "So what are you saying? That I'm not fit to lead my team?" "I'm saying that if you don't change your approach, we'll have to reconsider your role," Charles replied bluntly. "I believe in your potential as a leader, Linda. You're smart, capable, and you've proven that you can get results. But leadership isn't just about results, it's about how you achieve them. And right now, the way you're leading isn't sustainable." Linda sat in stunned silence, the weight of Charles's words sinking in. For a moment, her confidence faltered, and she looked down at her hands, which were tightly clasped in her lap. "I'm not trying to push you out," Charles continued, softening his tone slightly. "But we can't keep operating like this. If you're willing to commit to real change, we can provide the support and coaching you need. But if you're not, then we'll have to make some tough decisions." Linda took a deep breath, her expression unreadable. She glanced up at Charles, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing her options. "I'll think about it," she finally said, her voice quiet but strained. Charles nodded. "Take the time you need, but understand that this is a serious issue. We can't afford to delay addressing it." As Linda left the office, Charles leaned back in his chair, feeling the tension in his shoulders. This was one of the hardest parts of leadership, making tough decisions that impacted not just individuals, but the entire company culture. He hoped Linda would take the opportunity to grow, but he knew that if she didn't, he would have to make a difficult call. In the days that followed, Charles continued to focus on the broader transformation of the company. He met with department heads, held more open forums, and ensured that the new feedback systems were fully implemented. The company was gradually moving in the right direction, but Linda's situation weighed heavily on his mind. One afternoon, as Charles was preparing for a meeting, Rick knocked on his office door. "Got a minute?" Rick asked, stepping in. "Sure, what's up?" Charles replied, gesturing for him to sit. "I just spoke with Linda," Rick began, his tone cautious. "She's decided to step down." Charles raised an eyebrow, surprised by the news. "Step down?" Rick nodded. "She said she's not willing to continue under the new leadership expectations. She feels like it's not the right fit for her anymore." Charles sighed, feeling a mix of disappointment and relief. "It's probably for the best. I was hoping she'd come around, but if she's not willing to adapt, it wouldn't have worked in the long term." Rick nodded in agreement. "I think it's a sign that the culture is changing, though. The fact that she recognized it and made the decision to leave, it shows that the new expectations are clear, and they're having an impact." Charles leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the situation. "You're right. It's a tough loss, but it's also a necessary one. We need leaders who are fully on board with this transformation." As Rick left the office, Charles sat in silence for a few moments, contemplating the road ahead. The company was evolving, and while there would be more challenges to come, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The changes they were making, though difficult, were setting the foundation for a stronger, more inclusive company. He glanced out the window, watching as employees moved through the halls, their faces filled with energy and determination. For the first time in a long while, Charles felt hopeful about the future of the company he had built. The transformation wasn't complete, but they were getting there, one step at a time. The following weeks tested Charles's patience and resolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. The changes he had implemented were taking effect, but resistance was still present in pockets of the company. Most notably, there were whispers among some of the longer-tenured employees who questioned the new direction. It was during one of these quiet afternoons in his office that Derek knocked, his expression unreadable. "Got a minute?" Derek asked as he entered, holding a tablet in his hand. Charles looked up from his desk, motioning for him to sit. "What's on your mind?" Derek tapped the screen, then handed the tablet to Charles. "It's feedback from Linda's team. HR gathered more details, and the picture isn't looking great." Charles scrolled through the report, his brow furrowing as he read. It wasn't just a matter of poor performance. There were several reports of toxic interactions. Some employees had noted that while Linda had toned down her public outbursts, the environment remained tense and unwelcoming. "We've given her plenty of chances to turn things around," Derek said, "but her leadership style is stuck in the past. I know she's been with us for years, but we can't let this go on." Charles set the tablet down, his mind racing. Linda's dedication to results had once been seen as an asset, but now it was clear that her way of achieving them was eroding the company's culture from the inside. He thought back to the day he had witnessed her berating an employee when he was undercover as a janitor. It was the same issue, just playing out in different ways. "You're right," Charles said, nodding slowly. "We can't afford to have leaders who are holding back progress. It's time to make a move." Derek raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of relief and concern. "You're thinking of letting her go?" "I don't see any other choice," Charles replied, his tone firm but filled with regret. "We've provided coaching, mentorship, and multiple chances. If she can't change, then we have to do what's best for the company." The decision weighed heavily on him. Firing someone who had been with the company for years wasn't easy, but Charles knew it was necessary to protect the new culture they were building. He scheduled a meeting with HR to discuss the transition, ensuring that Linda would be treated with respect throughout the process. A week later, Linda was gone. Her departure sent ripples throughout the company. Some employees were shocked, others were relieved. Charles held a company-wide meeting to address the leadership change, taking the opportunity to reinforce his vision for the future. I know change can be difficult, Charles began, standing at the front of the conference room, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. But I want you all to know that we are committed to creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and respected. Leadership is about more than just results. It's about how we achieve those results together. He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was quiet, the weight of his message hanging in the air. I'm proud of the progress we've made so far, Charles continued, but we still have a long way to go. This isn't just about a change in leadership. It's about setting a new standard for how we treat each other every day. I want each of you to know that your voice matters, and we are here to listen. As the meeting concluded, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. Linda's departure was a necessary step, but it was far from the last challenge he would face. He had chosen this path not because it was easy, but because it was right. Over the next few months, the company began to stabilize. New leaders rose to fill the gaps left by those who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the changing culture. With each new hire and promotion, Charles emphasized the importance of empathy, collaboration, and accountability. The transformation was slow but steady. Employee satisfaction surveys showed marked improvement, and productivity began to rise as well. But more than the numbers, Charles noticed a shift in the energy of the workplace. Employees seemed more engaged, more willing to collaborate, and most importantly, more willing to speak up when something wasn't right. One afternoon, as Charles walked through the office, he overheard a conversation between two employees in the break room. They were discussing a project, but what struck Charles was the tone of the conversation: respectful, supportive, and constructive. It was a far cry from the tense, competitive atmosphere that had once dominated the office. For the first time in a long while, Charles felt confident that the company was moving in the right direction. Months had passed since Linda's departure, and the company was slowly settling into its new identity. The energy was palpable, but Charles knew that the transformation of a company's culture wasn't something that could be achieved in a few months alone. It was an ongoing process, one that required vigilance, dedication, and a continued focus on the people at the heart of the organization. Sitting in his office one afternoon, Charles took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. He opened his laptop and scrolled through the latest employee satisfaction survey results. They were more than just numbers to him now. They represented the collective voice of the workforce, their thoughts, concerns, and hopes for the future. The improvement was undeniable. Engagement levels were higher than they had been in years. Departments that had once been bogged down by internal politics and distrust were now collaborating more openly. Most importantly, the toxic behaviors that had plagued the company, particularly from certain managers, were no longer being tolerated. Still, Charles knew there was work to be done. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts, and Derek stepped in, a smile on his face. "Got some good news," he said, holding up a file. "We've just finalized the quarterly review, and things are looking really solid." Charles gestured for him to sit. "Let's hear it." Derek opened the file and read through the highlights. "Revenue is up, productivity across departments has increased by nearly 15%, and turnover rates have dropped significantly. The new leadership approaches are making a real difference." Charles nodded. "That's great to hear. But how are the people? Are they really feeling the change?" Derek chuckled, shaking his head. "You're one of the few CEOs who asks that question before anything else. But yeah, the feedback is overwhelmingly positive. Employees are reporting higher levels of trust in management, and there's a noticeable shift in team morale." Charles leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. The numbers were good, but knowing that the people in his company were thriving meant everything. As they talked through more of the details, Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression becoming thoughtful. "Actually, I've been meaning to tell you about something else." Charles raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "There's a candidate who's been getting a lot of attention. Someone we're considering for a leadership role in one of the remaining departments that's still underperforming," Derek explained. "Her name is Erica, and she's got the kind of experience and approach we need right now. Charles sat up. Tell me more about her. Derek smiled. Erica's been in the industry for about 10 years, but what really stands out is her track record of turning around toxic environments. She's led culture shifts in several companies, and her employees rave about her leadership. She's tough, but fair, empathetic, but holds people accountable. Charles leaned forward, intrigued. Sounds like someone we could use. Exactly, Derek said. I've already set up a meeting for you to speak with her. The next day, Charles sat in the conference room, waiting for Erica to arrive. He'd done his research and was impressed by what he'd read about her. But what mattered most to him was whether her values aligned with the new culture he was trying to build. When Erica walked in, Charles was struck by her calm confidence. She greeted him with a warm smile and firm handshake, her demeanor both professional and approachable. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me, Charles, Erica began, settling into her seat. The pleasure's mine, Charles replied. I've heard great things about your work. Erica smiled modestly. I've been fortunate to work with some great teams, but I've also seen the damage that poor leadership can cause. That's why I'm so passionate about creating environments where people feel empowered and valued. Charles nodded, instantly feeling a connection to her philosophy. That's exactly the kind of mindset we need here. We've made a lot of progress in shifting the culture, but there's still more work to be done, especially in some departments that are struggling to adapt. I've read about the changes you've implemented, Erica said. It's impressive, especially coming from the CEO level. Most cultural shifts start lower in the ranks, but you've set the tone from the top. That's rare. Charles smiled. I went undercover as a janitor to really understand what was going on. I saw things that made me realize we had lost sight of our values, and I couldn't ignore it. Erica's eyes widened with admiration. That's incredible. It shows you're not just talking about change, you're living it. I try, Charles said with a nod. But it's going to take more than just one person to keep this going. That's where you come in. Over the next hour, they discussed Erica's experience, her approach to leadership, and the challenges she had faced in previous roles. Charles was impressed by her insight, but what really stood out to him was her unwavering commitment to her people. She understood the delicate balance between driving results and fostering a healthy, inclusive work environment. I think you'd be a perfect fit for the role, Charles said as their meeting came to a close. We need leaders who believe in the long-term vision of what we're building here, and I'm confident you're one of those people. Erica smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I'd be honored to join the team, Charles. I believe in what you're doing here, and I'd love to be part of it. As they shook hands to seal the deal, Charles felt a surge of optimism. Erica was the kind of leader who could help solidify the cultural transformation they had worked so hard to achieve. In the weeks that followed, Erica settled into her role seamlessly. She immediately set to work on addressing the issues in her department, meeting one-on-one with employees to understand their challenges and concerns. Her approach was a breath of fresh air, and it didn't take long for the department to start showing signs of improvement. Charles watched with pride as Erica led her team with grace and authority. She wasn't afraid to make tough decisions, but she always did so with empathy and fairness. Under her guidance, the department that had once been one of the company's weakest links began to thrive. But more than that, Erica's leadership had a ripple effect across the company. Other managers looked to her as a model of what a modern, inclusive leader should be. Her influence reached far beyond her own department, and Charles could see that she was helping to solidify the cultural changes they had worked so hard to implement. As Charles walked through the office one evening, long after most employees had gone home, he found himself reflecting on how much had changed since he first went undercover. The company felt different now, more alive, more vibrant. The toxic behaviors that had once festered were being weeded out, and in their place, a culture of respect and collaboration was blossoming. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to overcome, and Charles knew that the work would never truly be finished. But for the first time in a long while, he felt confident that they were on the right path. As he stood at the window, watching the lights of the city twinkle in the distance, Charles smiled. He had set out to change his company, But in the process, he had also changed himself. The lessons he had learned along the way would stay with him for the rest of his life. And as he looked toward the future, he knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come. 6 months after Erica's arrival, the company had finally settled into its new rhythm. The once toxic environment had been replaced with a culture of mutual respect, transparency, and collaboration. Charles had come to see this transformation not as an endpoint, but as the foundation for the company's future. Yet, as the culture shifted, so did Charles himself. On a brisk morning, Charles entered the office early, something he found himself doing more often these days. It wasn't out of obligation, but because he truly enjoyed the energy in the building. The changes they had fought for were no longer mere initiatives. They were woven into the fabric of the company. As he walked through the halls, he greeted employees by name, exchanging quick smiles and bits of conversation. He passed by a small gathering of employees in the break room, discussing a project with genuine enthusiasm. The laughter, the camaraderie, it was all a stark contrast to the tense, hierarchical atmosphere he had once observed during his time undercover as a janitor. He paused outside the conference room and peered in. Erica was holding her weekly department meeting. She stood at the head of the table, engaging her team with confidence and ease. It was clear she had earned their trust and respect. Charles smiled, knowing she had been the right choice. Charles continued his walk to the executive floor, where Derek was waiting for him. He had asked for an informal check-in to discuss some long-term strategies. When Charles entered the office, Derek had already prepared coffee for them both, a warm smile on his face. "Ready for our check-in?" Derek asked, handing him a mug. Charles accepted the coffee, sitting down. "Absolutely. What's the latest?" Derek opened a file on his tablet and slid it across the desk toward Charles. "We've just finished a company-wide feedback survey, and the results are, well, they're pretty incredible." Charles scanned the document, his eyes widening slightly at the numbers. Employee satisfaction had reached an all-time high, with over 85% of employees reporting that they felt valued and respected in the workplace. Even the departments that had struggled the most during the transition were showing signs of significant improvement. "This is amazing," Charles said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I knew things were getting better, but this is more than I expected." Derek grinned. "It's a testament to the work you've done. The employees are finally starting to believe in the vision we've set out to achieve." Charles leaned back in his chair, his mind drifting back to the days when he had first made the decision to go undercover. It had been a gamble, a risk he hadn't been sure would pay off. But now, seeing the tangible results of their efforts, he knew it had all been worth it. "There's something else," Derek said, interrupting his thoughts. "The board wants to recognize you for your leadership. They're planning a special event, a celebration of the company's transformation. They want you to speak to the entire organization." Charles raised an eyebrow. "A celebration?" Derek nodded. "They believe this is a moment worth commemorating. The turnaround is significant, and they want to honor the impact you've made." Charles took a deep breath, a mix of pride and humility washing over him. He had never sought out recognition or accolades, but he understood the importance of marking the moment. The company had come a long way, and celebrating that progress would give everyone a sense of ownership in the change. "All right," Charles said with a nod. "Let's do it." A week later, the company gathered in the large auditorium for the event. Employees filled the seats, chatting excitedly as they waited for the presentation to begin. The atmosphere was charged with positivity, a far cry from the uncertainty and tension that had once gripped the organization. As Charles stepped onto the stage, a wave of applause greeted him. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the smiling faces before him. This wasn't just about the company's success. It was about the people. The real heroes of the transformation were the employees who had embraced the changes, who had chosen to believe in a new way of doing things. "Thank you," Charles began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's hard to put into words what this moment means to me. When I started this journey, I had a vision for what this company could be. a place where every employee felt valued, respected, and empowered to contribute to something greater than themselves. But I couldn't have done it alone. This transformation belongs to all of you. The room quieted, the weight of his words sinking in. We've come a long way, Charles continued, and the path wasn't always easy. There were times when it seemed like the old ways of doing things would win out, times when the culture we were trying to build felt like it might slip away. But you, each of you, chose to fight for something better. And today, we're standing here because of that choice. He paused, allowing a moment of reflection to settle in the room. I want to acknowledge the difficult conversations we had to have, the hard decisions, the restructuring, and yes, even saying goodbye to some of the people who had been part of this company for a long time. Change isn't easy, and it's not always painless. But we did it because we knew it was necessary to create the kind of workplace we could all be proud of. Charles's gaze swept across the audience, landing on familiar faces, Derek, Erica, and others who had played pivotal roles in the company's rebirth. I also want to remind you that this isn't the end, he said, his tone growing more resolute. This is just the beginning. The culture we've built isn't something we can take for granted. We have to protect it, nurture it, and continue to grow. Every day, we have the opportunity to choose how we show up, how we treat each other, and how we contribute to the future of this company. The audience remained silent, hanging on his every word. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together, Charles said. But more than that, I'm excited for what's to come. Because now, we've built a foundation that can carry us into the future. A future where everyone's voice matters, where kindness and integrity guide our actions, and where we all take responsibility for the culture we want to create. He took a deep breath, a smile spreading across his face. This is our legacy, Charles concluded, and I can't wait to see where we take it from here. The room erupted into applause, the sound filling the space with a sense of unity and accomplishment. As Charles stepped off the stage, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for everyone who had believed in the power of change. In the days that followed, the company continued to thrive. New hires were brought into a culture that valued their contributions, and the leadership team remained committed to fostering an environment of respect and collaboration. Charles's decision to go undercover had sparked a transformation that would leave a lasting impact on the company for years to come. As Charles stood in his office one evening, gazing out at the skyline, he reflected on the journey. The company had changed, but so had he. He had learned the true meaning of leadership, not just managing people or driving results, but creating a space where everyone could grow and succeed. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because this was more than just a company, it was a family. And so, from the shadows of a fractured workplace, Charles forged a new culture of respect, integrity, and inclusivity. His journey reminds us that no matter how deeply rooted dysfunction may be, with courage, empathy, and a willingness to lead by example, even the most broken environments can be transformed into spaces where people thrive. Thank you for joining us on Hopeful Horizon. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another inspiring story like this one.